Michelle.
Daniel.
OG
OG
Rose.
And Sam!
Sam! Greener Side of Sam has come to Deer Haven Farm.
We are so happy.
We are so thrilled. It's so wonderful to have you here. Sanduni called it OG Rose headquarters, so thank you for being at the headquarters.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. We had an awesome day here.
Yes.
It was wonderful. Best day ever.
We've had a blast.
I'm so thankful to be here, actually in person.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's a
we're
thrill.
like,
It's a dream come true.
It is.
So,
It's always so delightful.
yeah, we started talking. We're going to do, now it's 11:30 at night, so who knows where the time goes.
We're like night owls.
We like to
amazing.
talk a lot here.
and it's been a thrill. The work that Sam does on her channel, we just find inspiring and really enjoy her. I've said it many times. Her take on the Metamorphosis by Kafka is one I will not forget and now reference all the time. So greatly appreciated. And her children are wonderful. So they've been playing with our children all day. So that's been super neat. And we're just really thrilled to have Sam here today. So Sam, you also wrote a wonderful story called Blue Raspberry, which we enjoyed very much. What inspired that story? And I don't want to give it away because it's so well constructed, but everyone should go to your channel and listen to it.
So the inspiration I got was my grandparents actually live in Arizona, and we would be driving down the roads from the big cities because they would pick me up in either Tucson or Phoenix when I would fly in, and we would go in the countryside, and I would see these small towns with like just a couple houses that were just in the middle of nowhere, and I always thought to myself, well how do these people, if these people don't have a car, because I didn't see any cars, I'm like, how do they go and get out of these towns? And so that's kind of what inspired the structure of the story. But the story itself, it's, and I don't want to give too much away, but the story itself is talking about the question why, and when children ask the question why, and how we answer that question. Should we answer that question in a truth or a lie? And is it better to tell them the truth or lie to them in particular instances? And because Poppy, the scene sets up where she tells Mr. Allen, and she's like, Mr. Allen, somebody at the gas station told me that raspberries are blue. And she actually believed it. And, well, is it a good thing that she was told that raspberries are blue, or is it bad that she was told this little lie? And then she goes into other instances of lies. And in Mr. Allen, he is not a good person, but he tells her the truth. And he says, well, I'm pouring gas, when she asks him what he's doing.
Right.
And he doesn't tell her why he's pouring gas, but it's kind of implied like he's not going to be doing something good.
Right.
And he just tells her the truth. And the idea is kind of telling children the truth to prepare them for what's to come. Because how you were talking about earlier today, children actually do have a large capacity to learn and understand.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's kind of what inspired the story and what the story is about.
Yeah, I just want to say I love the story so much, Sam, and I appreciate what you just shared now as well on the story and where like its origins and how the idea was sparked for you. And reading the story, we used to go to southern Appalachia. I was up in like New England area, sort of just south of New England area, in my like high school, middle school, high school years, and we would like with my youth group, we would like take these trips down to southern Appalachia, like very small rural towns in Kentucky, and we would just like basically help people do construction jobs or odd jobs like around their houses or their trailers or whatever. And I was like completely like brought back into one of those small towns again when I read your story. It felt so much like that, like there's like this atmosphere of there's kind of this combination of hopelessness a little bit sometimes that you can feel in a small town when you just, it almost feels like, what are we doing, and where are we going, and can we go anywhere? Is there an out? And yet at the same time, there's this deep sort of rootedness of family and community there, and
Right.
And actually a sense of your town, even if it is very small, like it's yours, right? But so there's that tension of like that desire to sort of want to get out, but also so many people just stay in, they stay there and and their family, often a lot of times people will just end up sticking around and not necessarily leaving those towns. And so I don't know, it just completely put me in that place again of being in one of those small towns in southern Appalachia. I literally felt all those sensations again of what that was like, to be there. And Poppy in particular, that character, she was very endearing. Like she was the way you wrote her, she was just very, I don't know, we have children, so I think like you feel that sense of what a child would be like in asking that question and giving their, their kind of smucky little smile with their whatever they've been eating throughout the day or whatever. And I just thought she was very touching. Her character really, really gripped me, and I thought you wrote her really well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I agree. I really like the character of Poppy Michelle, and the atmosphere of the piece is very well constructed. It definitely pulls you in. Sam's reading of it is very well done. The dialogue is also so nice because the character, it's not rigid, and yet the responses are perfect, and it creates a kind of ambiguity where you're trying to figure out what's going on and how it pulls it in, and that's all very, very nicely done. I think also the moral question you're posing there, Sam, on this kind of idea of, is it good to lie? And there's a funny way in which a bad person, if they're telling the truth in a way, well, it's funny because it's precisely perhaps in a sense because they're bad that they're willing to not lie, right? So in that way, does the badness contribute to truth? Almost like a splendid vice in a kind of Augustan way, where you have some vices that actually contribute to doing the right thing. And precisely because he's a bad person, you could say it like this way, is it because he's a bad person that he's not willing to lie? Or is he a bad person that also does good things? To what degree is the badness making the truth come out? Or to what degree is he telling the truth despite the badness? Which is an interesting question. And I think the story does a very good job of exploring that. I think as parents, you often are wondering to what degree you should sugarcoat the truth. Obviously, you don't tell them everything. And there is a difference between a straight-up lie and an omission. There's differences between those things. Like when we recently had an incident where someone was hurt, but we're not going to go into the details of the injury, but we are going to tell them that somebody was hurt, right? So you kind of balance those different things. But I do think it is a mistake, and I'll be curious as a mother how you think about this. Like, I do think it's a mistake to hide too much from children. I do think that they actually can handle more than you think. And in fact, like our conversation was saying earlier, I actually think that often that children have more capacity than adults. It's just that adults know more, so it seems like they have more capacity. But you take a child and you introduce them basically to any language on planet Earth, and they can learn it when they're young enough. There's basically no social environment that they can't adapt to. Like, children seem like they can do anything, and adults are the ones that seem rigid and stuck in habits and unable to learn new things, where children seem like they can do a lot. So children seem, there's good reason to think that children have more capacity than adults, just less knowledge or experience or whatever, where adults have more knowledge and experience, just less capacity. And I like, your story made me think about that.
Yeah, I think as a mother, it's hard to say whether it's good or bad to sugarcoat something or to just tell them the full truth, because we don't know the outcomes of how it's going to affect them.
Right.
However, in this situation, in the story, the way I made Mr. Allen tell her the truth, it was almost like he was preparing her for the outcome. Because at the end, it doesn't really say what happened to Poppy. But I think one can assume that Poppy would ask, why did Mr. Allen do the thing that he did?
Right.
Because you could look at Mr. Allen and be like, well, he was a good person because he helped Poppy.
Sure.
Or you could also look at him and be like, he was a bad person because he made Poppy the only survivor.
Right.
And now she has to live with this trauma.
Right.
And it's like, as adults, we forget. I think the key thing that we're missing is we don't think about the possible outcomes that it could have if we tell them the truth or if we tell them a lie. And so if we were talking about death, and my daughter came up to me and was asking a very difficult question of, why did Grandma die, or
Sure.
how did she die? A lot of us, I think it's easy to say, well, I'm just going to sugarcoat it because I want to make my child feel good in this moment.
Right.
And I don't want them to feel that dread that I feel.
Right.
But if we were more honest with them, then I think it would actually prepare them for those very, very difficult things that happen in life.
Oh, yes.
Like death, or relationships that crumble because that's very difficult as well. I mean, there are so many things I think, and I think this is where schools kind of miss the mark here too, is we're not really, we're limiting children with what we're teaching them, and by limiting what we're teaching, we're limiting their capacity to understand.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think there is so much of life is trade-offs, and if you get the immediate, they feel better, you might be making them more fragile, when the eventual encounter of the realities of life occur. They might be too fragile to handle it. At the same time, if you give them too much too soon, it could break them, right? So, and you don't want to do that. But I think a conscious awareness of the need to unveil the truth is very well, as opposed to, I think a lot of parents can maybe end up in a perpetual postponing, or even not even feeling the need, because life will eventually tell them. I don't need to tell them about death because they'll eventually figure it out for themselves. Right. Yeah, they might. And it might be really, really terrible because they had no preparation. That would be like saying, well, I don't need to encourage my kid to say lift weights because eventually something will happen that they'll be forced to use muscles. Yeah, okay. Yeah, they'll have something fall on them they can't lift off their body. It's like, that's not too good. So we have a weird mindset where we don't think about things in terms of preparing. We think about terms as what addresses the solution now. The problem now. And what can often address the problem now with kids is a lie, or kind of white lie. And yeah, it addresses it, but you're not preparing. Preparing is a language that has vision. Preparing is a language that thinks about the future. Preparing is a language that is considering what is to come. And if you have a culture of a lot of immediacy, if you have a culture of a lot of there's a problem, let's solve it, as opposed to how do we manage it. Like, death is not something you solve, right? Death is something you have to manage a relationship to. There is always going to be death in life. So you don't solve the problem of death by making your kid feel better now, right? What you have to do is figure out how to expose them to it in a manner so when they encounter death, they're able to manage it. But that's not how people tend to think. They just tend to think in terms of, what makes things feel nice now. And that also, I think, gets into how our metric for success now is everyone feels nice. We say, it was a good conversation if afterwards everyone feels nice. Well, everyone may feel nice because we fed their self-deception. It is not necessarily the case that people feel nice because you did a good job. They may feel nice precisely because you did a bad job. And so feeling nice or feelings are not that feelings are bad, but they're not necessarily a good metric. A better metric is to think of, reality is a place. What is the nature of reality? The nature of reality is a place where hardship occurs. Okay. All right, well, that being the case, should I prepare the child or should I not prepare the child? Well, obviously you should prepare them. If it is only a matter of inevitability that you will encounter hardship, then it would seem quite unloving to not actually prepare them to handle that, right? And yet we somehow create logics where it's almost loving not to engage in that preparation. And then, I'll pass it back to you. That kind of speaks, there's a lot of studies that show a reason you have not just this, but a reason there's a lot of mental illness today is precisely because you have people encountering failure for the first time. Like, mental illness in Ivy League schools is extremely high. Because if you make it into an Ivy League, you basically have never gotten anything but an A on your test. You failed very little. You've always been the top of the mark. Well, then you get somewhere where you're just another. Everyone around you is similar, and you might get your first B. Well, you have no resources to handle this. And so, no existential psychological resources. And so you get terrible mental illness issues. Now, there are other reasons why mental illness occurs, but it's interesting to show that there seems to be a correlation between encountering failure and the ability to not overreact or not be devastated, let's put it that way, not be devastated when failure eventually comes. And is it really an act of love if you set someone up to not be able to handle failure when it occurs? And I appreciate how your story brings so many of these questions out.
Mm-hmm. And going back to sugarcoating it too, and what you were just talking about now, with schools, I see this so much in English classes, literature, where the teacher will say, I want you to find out what Kafka meant.
Right.
Instead of saying, I want you to pick a point and find out how it resonates with you. Because then you're being creative with it.
Yes.
But the school system now, they're just saying, well, I want you to analyze the text without the creativity.
Right.
And that's why when I do my Kafka videos, I don't summarize. I just kind of speak to a point, and I say, this is how it resonates with me. And with the metamorphosis and care and how it spoke to me was the lack of care I see for the elderly. And how they're just kind of shoved into nursing homes and treated like bugs. And it's, you mentioned earlier that it's very difficult for people to talk about that because it kind of hits home. And I think it was, you said it was capitalism, right? Capitalism.
Yes.
If you look at the story through the lens of capitalism, you can kind of separate yourself from it.
Absolutely. You can say, look what a corrupt system does to someone.
Yes. But if you look at the story through the lens of, grandma and grandpa are going into a nursing home, that kind of hits close to home. And people don't like to think about that thing. But it's that very thing that prepares people for facing it.
Absolutely.
Because it's not sugarcoating it. And I also did that in the penal colony too, where instead of it being this society, because it kind of speaks of the feeling of a society that doesn't want to remove itself from its archaic ways of doing things.
Oh, yeah.
And it's easy to kind of like say, oh, well, like society does that, it is what it is, so what? But then it resonated with me was how women are treated in labor.
Right.
Which we are, in America, we are very much treated like cattle because there's the shortage in doctors and nurses. And it's created the system where women are treated very poorly in labor and just overall motherhood. And because it's almost like cogs in a machine. It's a very sad reality that a lot of people don't even want to look at because it's so horrible. However, by bringing up that specific point that resonates with me, it allows other women to be like, hey, yes, this is not a good thing.
Right.
We need to change it. We need to prepare for something different. And so the point I'm trying to get at is that it's not good to only analyze text.
Right.
And take the creativity out of it. Because then, in a way, you're kind of sugarcoating it by removing yourself from it. And by doing that, it just sets people up for failure. Because they don't know how to be creative and interpret a text in a way that it resonates with themselves. And if they can't figure that out, then they're not going to be able to figure out how to do X, Y, and Z when they're in a certain situation that's very difficult to handle emotionally.
Excellent. I think that's very well put. There's a way in which if the penal colony has something to do with some military people on some island or who knows where, then whatever. It's it's great literature, and it's okay. I can see some stuff here, but it's distant. In the same way that if Kafka is dealing with some guy in Prussia or whatever who turns into a bug, well, that's a cool story. That's neat.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's about how people are turned into cogs and machines. Okay. Well, I hate capitalism, so this story doesn't have anything to do with me. So there's a distancing. That distancing, I think that's very well put, Sam, because that distancing has a way of being a lie. Like we're actually kind of in a way treating ourselves we are treating ourselves like a child and being the one telling ourselves that lie.
Yes, exactly. It's like saying raspberries are blue or raspberries can be blue. And when they're not actually blue, they're red, and they don't taste like the drink that you drink.
Yeah.
And I know at a point in the story I said the Poppy smiled at the snake.
Yep.
And you could see that her teeth were rotting.
Right.
And it was like the lies were rotting away.
Absolutely.
Her ability to understand.
Right. Oh, well, a lie that you accept has to enter through understanding. And it has to affect your understanding. Like, a lie you know is a lie is not really a consequential lie. And arguably not even a lie. It's a notion. Mm-hmm. Like, for something to be a lie, you have to accept it. Which means it compromises your ability to reason. Because it got through your reason and through your understanding. So, every lie that we accept transforms the framework through which we allow all acceptance. And what else might we accept into our worldview if we accepted X lie? So it begins to trickle all the way down. And it tends to change us throughout our entire being. If we are not someone who has the possibility of being turned into a bug or treating other people like a bug, then we cannot understand our actions in terms of evidence that we are participating in the metamorphosis. And so we have no possibility of being said character. And so, as we send our grandparents off to a nursing home, and so as we ourselves are turned into a bug, we are not able to think through the situation in ways that Kafka taught us because we distance ourselves from Kafka. And so it is not able to influence our understanding. In fact, our understanding of the situation will probably be an aid of us not getting that Kafka is relevant here. The exact opposite of what we should take it for. The same applies with the penal colony. If the penal colony has nothing to do with, say, pregnancy, then we can't think of the penal colony, say, when we're going through labor, when we're going through those experiences. And so our understanding cannot use the penal colony to be a framework to understand what's happening in America. As a result, it's hard to imagine anything changing in America. And at the very least, it's hard to imagine feeling seen. You don't feel like like when you understand that a story can communicate something that you're going through, that gives you communicate and community can go together in that way. And so the inability to connect with these stories can contribute to feelings of being alone. So when you have education that, say, just teaches analytical thinking, no creative thinking. Well, creative thinking is participatory thinking. If you're creating, you're participating in. You have to participate in a work to absorb it enough into yourself to create according to it. So we have a bunch of kids reading a bunch of stories that they're not even part of, and then telling them to care about it and to take a test on it that their fate is based on. No wonder, the school system creates a lot of stressed out kids that don't care, and yet feel like they have to care because their future is decided, and it's all pathological, and it's a mess. We should absolutely incentivize and train the skills of good reading and analytical reading and examining a text. But to develop those skills and not make an opening for creative reading is like giving people tools and no project to work on. Eventually, what would happen if I gave you a bunch of wrenches and never gave you a project? They'd be a weight. Right. The only thing they would function to do is be something to carry around and be heavy. And for what? Nothing. By not giving creative projects, we're not giving people things to use their tools on. And so the tools are weights, and people just feel weighted down.
By removing creativity, we're removing the capacity to understand. And I don't even know why we did it in the first place. And maybe there was good intentions behind it, like the people, like the lady at the gas station who said, "Oh, it's blue raspberries are real." She probably just wanted to make Poppy feel good.
Yeah.
However, by doing that, and I think that. I think that teachers will say, I want you to analyze this text and tell me what the author thinks. I genuinely wonder if the teachers were thinking to themselves, well, maybe what we need to do is actually find out what Kafka meant.
Right.
And so their intention was good. However, the result of it is really bad because it completely stripped the creativity away.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just add to your point on, I think the school system got rid of creativity because they thought creativity got in the way of understanding, which is when it's the exact opposite. There's a great irony. We, in fact, understand through creativity.
Yes.
Understanding and creativity are not in conflict. They enable one another. And in fact, our very desire to care about a text is linked with our belief in our capacity to create with it. And if we don't believe we can create with it, we don't care to understand it. Yeah. And so so there was a movement in education that said, well, we don't want people just reading to create. We want them to get the thing itself. Very enlightenment, very Kantian.
Yes, exactly the point I'm trying to make. And that's why I think it's very, very important to move this creativity back into schools. Like, for example, you've got a group of teenagers who we were talking about earlier who always feel like they're in love. Like, this is the best person for them.
Right.
And why not bring in the story of young Verta and be like, hey,
right,
these are the emotions you're feeling. This is the parallel to it. Mm-hmm. This is how you can connect with this text and understand it through your own specific thing that you're going through. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing. That's the thing that's going to make kids actually care in school. Yeah. Because they can actually see it through their own lens and be like, oh, I'm kind of like young Verta right now. Right. Or I'm kind of like Lottie. And this is just really an impossible situation to go through. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's so important to, if we're going to bring this type of thinking back into schools, to bring it in that way and say, this is absolutely specifically how this story can affect you. And yes, it may be a difficult truth to face. However, it will prepare you for what's to come, or hopefully, our hope would be better prepare you for what's to come.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's so good and so true and so important. And it makes me think about two things. And like one thing is that in high school, it was almost like, I wouldn't say like a laughed off type of thing, but even if there was a time when, you know, say an English teacher was sort of like, they'd almost make it almost a joke to sort of connect it to like, oh, like, you know about this in dating, huh? Or like, you know, there's this like,
Yes,
and it was just like, and then it would quickly move on to like, you know, whatever we're supposed to know for,
Right.
you know, what we need to know about the book for whatever we're going to be maybe quizzed about or something. And to me, it was just like, that's so sad because it's really actually almost freakishly strange how like, I'm sorry, it is
It's so terrible.
it's freakish.
I threw up in my mouth and swallowed it. I had to swallow it back down.
Oh, sorry,
'Cause I was
Nick.
flashing to the English classroom. It's so bad.
I just, you know, I loved English because me and Marilise would volunteer for like reading out the play parts. Nobody else wanted to do that.
Oh, me
and
too!
yes, and we
Me
were like, and Marilise and I would get so animated, like put on accents in our like English.
That's amazing.
I read out The Telltale Heart, and
Wow.
I got really into it, and my classmates were like, "Oh my gosh, you're such a nerd."
I wish I was there. Oh my god.
But like, it's kind of freakish how little, how ripe that is. That like you're saying, what a ripe opportunity to see a story as applicable as an insight for your own life.
Yes.
And yet, it was never discussed that way ever.
No.
Ever. It's almost like I'm almost impressed. Actually, like, how could they possibly discuss this stuff without connecting it to real life?
Like
telling-
we're just gonna
I
give
don't
a summary
understand.
and nothing else.
I'm telling
nothing
you.
else.
School is where you go to hate books. School
Well,
is where you go to hate books.
Yeah, I
And you
didn't
know
really
what?
read. And
I did hate books in high school for this very specific reason.
Yes.
And they picked books like, and I still hate it. I still hate it to this day. They picked books like Moby Dick.
Yes.
And I was like, how does learning about whale blubber relate to me? It doesn't. Like if I was a teacher, I would care less if a student could recite the summary of a book to me. I care more about if they actually are understanding the essence, the feeling the book is actually giving out, that can connect them to their own lives, that can help prepare them
Yes.
for the very real world.
I just want to know where you go in modern society where you're walking down the street and someone says, "Hey, it's time. Give me that summary of Moby Dick."
just you wait.
No,
I guess it might happen.
It's done.
Some random gas
It's here.
station. Like,
It has arrived. You are 32. This is what it was all about. and if you don't know the summary, it's over. You lose your social security. You lose your social security number.
You
Like they
lose
street
your
take
soul.
it. You lose it all.
Just kidding.
I'm just waiting for when the ability to know the summaries of books proves to have any value whatsoever.
Right.
Zero.
Yeah.
The only thing, the value of books is the ability to incorporate them into a discussion about something, which means you make them what? Relate. If I start talking to you about a book that does not relate to what we are talking about, you will wonder, what the heck am I doing? Why are you bringing up this book that doesn't relate to the current matter at hand? Now, if I bring up a book that relates to the matter of hand and somehow illuminates it, brings it out, brings stuff together, you might be, oh wow, that's really great. But the entire art of books is relatability.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Books do not matter. Books do not matter at all if you cannot relate them. And
yeah.
we teach them in a kind of it's like atheist a-relational setting.
It's like math.
It's
You
like
teach
math.
them like math.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and as if it's
yeah.
as if it's like a-relational. It's like we teach all subjects in school like a-relational. They're taught like by a-relational, I mean like not relating, a-relating. I'm thinking of a phrase. And so we don't relate.
Yeah,
we
no,
don't care.
No, and honestly, like, yeah, you don't care if you don't relate to it. And I only really ever related to books, genuinely related to book. Like, okay, so I became an English major because of a class I had in college So yes, this was still in the traditional institutional setting
Sure.
of education, but
And we're
it
not
was,
saying you can't have
Yeah,
a good
yeah.
English teacher.
Yeah,
there are
had,
random
yeah.
saint English
Yes,
teachers
exactly.
that are
That you're like,
saving
thank God
souls
for them.
every day.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that, thank God for those teachers. But I had this class on motherhood and literature, and it was like literally 7 girls. Well, there was one boy the first day, but he didn't
left.
stick around.
He knew his place.
We didn't tell him. No, he
He
could
knew.
have stayed.
He
I think
knew.
I don't know if it was the fact that it was an 8 a.m. class or the fact that it was only women, but or if Tate was intimidating to him. The professor, she was like an associate professor, but she's probably a professor now, professor. But she was like very kind of had an intimidating presence, and we all would like walk in and she was seated, so she just looked like she was sitting there, but then she stood up, guys. She was literally like barely 5 foot tall.
Oh, that is
She's
so
just this tiny person, but like this intimidating
That
presence.
reminds me of Edna Mode on The Incredible.
Oh yes. But that class was one of the reasons why I wanted to become an English major, because of the fact that everybody shared something so relatable. Like we would read Moll Flanders, which honestly I didn't really like the book that much, but we'd read books like that of that genre, and that era, like and. I liked a lot of the other books, but that one not particularly. But it's just the one I remember the most. Anyways, because I didn't like it the most. But the fact of the matter is, people would talk about this book through how they could relate it to their own life. And there'd always be like Kelsey, and you should bring up something about farms or agriculture because that was her background, or or Arya, she was like really she was really into European like city life and stuff, and like these very particular things that you could tell from their own background and their own experiences helped inform and illuminate this book, and give their own understanding of it. Even if like it's their interpretation, but that's kind of all we have, we don't have the author there with us to talk to, but we can kind of come to a synthesis of maybe an approximation of what this book was really kind of getting at by understanding how it actually relates to our real lives. And that was the first time that I probably saw how, besides actually children's literature, I think that always was very relatable. My mom would read to us every night, and I thought that was beautiful, and it was just sort of fantastical, and, made me think of my own fantastical ways of, imaginary play with my twin sister and stuff like that. But yeah, like, basically, that was the first class that made me realize, like, oh, wow, like, there's something is relatable in these stories, but it didn't quite sink in. It really didn't sink in until after college.
Me too. Me
And
too.
that's when I was like, oh, like, books help us. It was like, it was wild.
Right.
And the other thing, really quick, one last thing I'll say is that in college too, this would be one of the more, I'm highlighting a great example of of relatability in reading through the motherhood and literature class, but there'd also be many classes and discussion groups where I'd bring up like how the book would relate to philosophy or philosophical ideas. I wouldn't say like, I'm going to bring up philosophy now, but it just would be like talking about the the meaning of life and stuff, like, and I would just readily, like, not in a mean way necessarily. I guess maybe for me, I'm too oblivious to realize if they were being mean, maybe, but I'd be pretty quickly like shut down. It would just be kind of like, that's not really applicable, or like, that's, the TA would just very quickly move it along. And I would always just be like, oh, okay,
Right.
like, I didn't understand why we wouldn't continue on with those questions about the text. And it's maybe because they weren't quite sure. And I think there's a fear, I think, sometimes in having to stick to the curriculum, and also in showing your own maybe vulnerability of not being sure about a certain thing as the TA or teacher,
Right,
which
right.
honestly, to me, I think like we can actually all relate to not knowing, and that would almost make a better rapport and relationship with that TA or teacher to be able to maybe even have a more robust type of session or whatever.
Right.
So I'm not saying like I wouldn't have done anything. I mean, hopefully I would do something a bit different as a TA if I were, but I'm saying I'm trying to empathize and understand where they're coming from. But it did bewilder me, because I was just like, how can we not really ask these questions about these deeper questions of the meaning of life and existence and all of that?
Right.
How could we not ask that in relation to this work of art or this text or this poem or this play?
Right, and you were talking about people being very, very particular in your class of 7 girls.
Yeah.
and I think that is, in my humble opinion, the genius of Kafka, because he, in his own writing, is extremely particular.
Right.
And these very surreal, dreamlike setups that he makes. And it is in that very particular writing that only he himself understands, because he even said, I'm trying to, I'm paraphrasing this, I'm trying to communicate something incommunicable that only I feel in my bones.
Mm-hmm.
In writing something that only he understands, he is able to capture that essence, that feeling. And I think that's what makes it so it gives other people the opportunity to capture their own essence through that story. It's like you see a lot of stories that are written and especially modern society, a lot of them try to be relatable. But in trying to be relatable, they are not relatable at all.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I think that's just a really quick and great, really excellent point that you're bringing up, Sam, is that it's almost ironic, right? Mm-hmm. You almost feel like the more particular somebody's going to get with their wording, like Kafka, like with their experiences or with their particularity, that would become less relatable to us because it is so particular that we couldn't possibly understand it somehow. But it's actually in that very particular, very just quintessential Kafka that makes us go, wow, or like your soul is gripped, or it just completely sets your heart ablaze. Like it's something where it's like it's in his particularity that it revives and really bolsters the particular in the reader. Mm-hmm. They're of a sense of their own particularity and like it's so crazy, right? Like I think that's so mind-boggling. It's like his own very unique depths of pain and grief and like love and and his desire, and yet we all in the sort of sensations of that know what that's like, right? But we can't know it. I can't know exactly like what does it mean for me to feel melancholic, sad. What does that feel like for Sam? It probably feels a bit different for you in your particularity, but we can both understand more or less. Yes. What that generally is, and yet it's always in the particular that we understand it best. And you have that, like, Daniel, maybe I'm just gonna make you do this, talk a bit about, like, how we had that discussion that one time about a chair and how like it's actually only ever in like a particular chair. Like if you ask somebody to think about a chair, it's only really in thinking about a particular chair that you could understand the general concept of a chair. It's like it's always through the particular.
Yes.
So there is this relation to this kind of everyone can understand it. So in a way it's kind of universal, but it's always in the particularity that it's both understood and experienced. So it kind of is like this ebb and flow between the, it's almost like these, I don't know how to put this. Wait, here. It's like the infinity loop. Okay, you've got a particularity here. Okay, and then on the opposite polar end, it's the other particularity, right, of the other person. And somehow they kind of coalesce in this, the center would represent sort of the universality of that they can both understand, that then it kind of oscillates between, but it's always understood through particularity. So, okay, chair.
A chair.
So, chair.
A few things. First off, nothing in the universe came into existence for the purpose of being relatable. We relate to a bunch of things that are enclosed in themselves. And so when writers try to make things that are relatable, they make worlds that don't exist. Relatability has to come as a result of an effort, of a work. It can't be found in the text itself. It has to be found in the interpretation. So the work of the act of making a work relatable has to come from the work of the interpreter to make it relatable. Therefore, when you have an education system that gets rid of and doesn't allow relatable interpretation, it's literally killing like one of the main functions of interpretation. And so why even bother? Second, one of the reasons this is occurring is because this mistake is because philosophy does matter, and everyone is influenced by Kant without realizing it, which is the idea that there is a noumenon that we're trying to access, and we're stuck to the phenomenon, and we're trying to get through the phenomenon to the noumenon, which is really hard because we're stuck in the phenomenon. If you had a more Hegelian interpretation, then you are, in your effort of perceiving the noumenon, simultaneously creating it, and the absolute is created in the act of seeking it, and so you can't separate. There's an observer effect, you could say. We don't read text with an observer effect in mind. We read it as Kantians. And so we really need to read books with an observer effect in mind. And you could say, well, that's what Derrida and the postmodernists were doing. Yes, no, they weren't clear. I think, for me, this gets into why we need what I call Hegelian hermeneutics. But now I'm getting into my Hegel quota for a conversation. I will abstain. But there is a need for a Hegelian hermeneutic.
Hegel. Hegel. We just like chatted
There you go,
Okay, I got my
Hegel.
Kafka quota in 10
so that's
times
good.
today.
That's good.
It's not like really truly a day if you don't
It's not
talk
Kafka.
about or Hegel.
No, to your point on the particular and the general, no one ever experiences any general anything. Generality arises as a result of an encounter with particulars that are then abstracted into a notion or a form that we then match up with other particulars to see if they indeed align with that. So generalities don't exist. There is no general chair. There's particular chairs. Therefore, if you're going to encounter a general chair, you must encounter a particular chair. But you see, in writing, it's possible to construct something that is unlike the world. So it is possible to construct a situation where you're dealing with general things. But the problem is, if you do that, since understanding formulates the notion of the general through an encounter with the particular, there is a mismatch between how the reader has formed notions in their daily life and the way you are asking them to form a notion in the text. You know, they arrive at generalities indirectly. If you form a text that's kind of too general, then you're asking them to form notions about the general from general. So there's a mismatch and it doesn't work. So, you know, Flannery O'Connor would really stress that you come to a story about humanity is about Dave. It's about a particular person. And she'll say that you see the sacramental, not by trying to construct a sacrament, but by describing something real, because if, you know, the universe is created by God, then everything is a sacrament if you just see it right. There's no need to construct sacraments. You're surrounded by sacraments. The issue is you need to see well. And so for her, as a Christian writer, you don't write a Christian text by trying to be Christian. You write a Christian text by just telling a story about the actual world. And that will inherently be sacramental because everything that was created points to the one who created it. So likewise, you point to generalities, or you point to the human race by talking about a particular person. And if you talk about the human race, well, there is no human race other than that which is known through particularity. So the only way to the universal is particularity. But here's the funny thing. So I think a lot of the education system kind of knows that, and they're like, exactly. So we want to get to the particular intention of the author, the particular meaning of what they're saying. Here's the issue, though. No. You need to get to the issue is that's unknowable. Like, even if you're a Kantian, you cannot know the particular intention because you can't access the mind of the author. So where are you going to get your particularity from? You're going to get your particularity from the relatability of the readers. The source of the particularity you need moves from the text to the readers. And by inviting them into creative interpretation, then you invite them to provide that particularity that you need to get a universal notion without which the text will seem inapplicable to your daily life, ergo meaningless. So if you don't make room for... Well, let's put it this way. We've established that understanding is only possible via particularity, yes? If relatability is necessary for particularity to have something to do with the reading of the text, if you don't allow relatability through particularity, you're basically making the text something that cannot be understood by readers, because that relatability introduces the particularity necessary for understanding. You basically can't understand something you can't relate to. Which, when you say it that way, is obvious.
It's like Moby Dick. I can't understand it.
Yeah, because you don't relate to it.
Right. And
no one has ever understood anything they don't relate to. You understand this couch because you relate to it. You're sitting on it.
Yeah.
And the depth of your relation traces out the contours of your understanding. And so when we make books, we treat books, we almost are like, if you relate to the book, that gets in your way, because subjectivity is bad, it gets in your way of understanding. So we think we should make the book as unrelatable as possible, and that will increase understanding when it makes understanding impossible.
it's really funny that you're like talking about this because a while ago there was this time that me and Javier were having a discussion on perennialism and universalism and stuff like that, and I remember specifically being like, what if we thought about it just in terms of relatability?
Sure.
You know, like, in a sense, the fact that something could be relatable is a type of universal.
Yes.
Because the commonality is that, oh, we all relate to this. So yeah, in a sense, there is something that we can say is like, in that way, it's not general in this sort of like abstract, unrelatable generality, okay? But there is we can say there's a trend of its like degree to which it's relatable by people, right? And in that way, it's kind of in that way, it's universal in that it's like human, right? It like taps into the essence of the human and what we can relate to as humans. And yeah, like the fact that we're all humans is universal. Literally every human on, every living being. Yes, there are many, many living beings in terms of
Sure.
animals and the ecosystem and nature and all of that. And that's all part of truly existence and everything like that. But as we understand the universe from like a cognitive perspective, everyone who has this type of cognitive perspective and ability is a human, Yeah. And so like, yeah, we're universally human, basically, right? And so anyways, it just made me chuckle a little bit because I'm like, oh, right, that idea of like the idea that it's such a good point that you're making, and it makes me think about this idea that maybe instead of thinking about trying to find, or yeah, just generally there can be discussions of the universal.
Well,
it's like let's find the relatability.
Well, and then before passing it on, I'll just note, when she lies to Poppy and says that raspberries are blue, she's trying to make it relatable. But
Yes.
that's why it's not relatable though, because it's poured in from the top. When you try to make something relatable, then you remove from Poppy the need to make it relatable for herself, and therefore it doesn't become relatable, and it becomes a kind of tyranny on her actually, because it's making her fragile where she's not prepared. And what kind of ends up happening is when we tell children lies, which we're trying to do to make them relatable. You could almost say we're trying to make them happy and therefore relatable to us, in a good mood, but we remove their capacity to relate to the real world, where raspberries are not blue. And so that makes them unable to understand the real world. Mm-hmm. And when they can't understand it, that means it's going to be difficult for them to operate in it. And likewise, we could view Kafka, and then I'll pass it on. Kafka is a story about characters who cannot relate to the situation they're in and therefore cannot understand it. And we could see that the school system is basically setting everyone up to be characters in Kafka stories, because you're denying people the ability to relate and therefore denying them understanding, and yet saying take a test. Likewise, you're denying Joseph K. Knowledge of his crime. You're denying him any sort of information of what to relate to, and yet you're telling him to defend himself. Mm-hmm. So there's a denial of relation, and thus a denial of understanding, of which kind of school seems to be kind of spreading. And we can also understand the failure to tell children to tell children truth as a denial of what they need to relate to the real world so that they could understand it properly and carry themselves about it in a manner where they don't end up, say, like a Joseph K. or so forth and so on.
And I also think there is this irrational fear, and maybe it is rational, but there is this fear there where we think that children cannot, there's this fear that we think that children can't have the capacity to understand in schools. And so what we do too is we don't give them stories that like the Metamorphosis or Sorrows of Young Berta, because we're like, the kids can't handle it.
Right.
Because, I mean, The Sorrows of Young Berta had a movement behind it after it came out that had bad consequences. However, I think by removing that, because of that fear, it is also bad because
Yes.
because then you're just putting another layer of sugarcoating.
Yes.
And being like, we'll just give you the stories like Moby Dick or other stories that maybe you can't relate to, but you'll get an A.
Yes.
And it'll be fine. However, when you go into life, you're going to be like, wow, I like this girl. I don't know how to handle these super difficult feelings that I'm going through.
Yes.
And it's so terrible.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's what do you do? How do you, I guess, how do we kind of measure what children can and cannot be capable of understanding without dire consequences? And it is, we kind of have to do it through trial and error, and that sounds so bad, but it's like we don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I find it fascinating that we tend to say children cannot handle X without doing anything whatsoever to see if they can. You know, we're like, well, kids can't handle this. Maybe actually we can't handle Chekhov, and so we like to say that kids can't, because golly, if we said they could and we don't give it to them, that would mean that we're in the way.
Yeah.
So there's a way in which, if we say kids can't handle X, then we are of no responsibility to give them X. So I think there is a indirect incentive to treat children as incapable so that we don't have to rise to their occasion.
Yeah.
It's because it's almost like we are the incapable ones, and we reflect off of our children in that way.
Yes. Yeah. Well, if we can say it's the children's fault, then that kind of is a barrier to keep us from recognizing our own inability.
Yeah.
So, yes, so in high school, generally, kids are given, like, Grapes of Wrath, they're given Hamlet, they're given a lot of other books that have nothing to do with their circumstance.
Right.
And like,
they're so far removed from it. They're just like,
by all means,
well, I don't care.
Grapes of Wrath is a great novel. By all means, Hamlet is important. But why not give them, say, you know, Chekhov, I mentioned Chekhov. Chekhov, you could take The Seagull, you could take The Orchard, you could take various plays that show family problems, or show dysfunctional family, or relationship misunderstanding. I promise you, a lot of those children could relate to that, and they are in circumstances where they face those consequences. The other big mistake is we tend to give, like, there's no philosophy in high school, and you see, the issue is that basically literature comes out for the philosophical, because you need the philosophical ability to connect the pieces of what's coming together. So whereas, say, in traditional education or classical education, philosophy would permeate the whole thing. You see, now what we do is we teach literature, and it's separate from, say, the entire life of the mind. But basically, like, they used to just teach the humanities, like, as a whole thing. And so humanities was literature, philosophy, art. Generally, I mean, we forget that, like, fields like sociology, anthropology, economics would be like reigned in like more of the 60s. You could get to the Malthusia and different things. But anyway, it's still newer. So for a lot of history, the classical education was the humanities, and they were taught all together because you would need them all, and they would actually inform one another and bring out one another and help you relate and understand one another.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, you know, I mean, I totally agree. The one. So two things. Well, sorry, three things now. So before, you know, getting married and having my own children, I nannied a lot and babysat a lot, and I loved that experience. And I would talk with kids a lot about, you know, just what they were thinking, or, you know, what they thought about things. And I remember really specifically this one memory I have with a certain family, and I was on, like, at a playground with the kids. It's actually, I was taking care of these kids, picking them up from school, taking them home, helping them with homework, you know, starting dinner, you know, and then just playing with them, basically, till their parents got home from work. And I remember picking up the kids, and we would, like, usually play a little bit on the playground behind the school. And I remember being on the swing with one of the boys. There were 4 kids, and I was like, hey, like, I was like, how was school today? Was it good? Like, how'd it go? And he was like, it was fine. I was like, okay. I was like, what's something, like, that you like about school? What's something you don't like? And he was like, well, mostly I don't really like it because they always, like, I feel like they're teaching us stuff and they don't think that we can, like, understand it, or, like, they don't think we can handle more. And I like that. I really don't like that, because there's other stuff that like I'm thinking about that it would be great if we could talk about. And that was basically what he said. You know, he was maybe like 11 or something like that. And I don't know, it just always really struck me, like, because it's to exactly what we're talking about here, that children do have a very big capacity,
Yes.
and they have incredible insights themselves and incredible questions. And, you know, it's strange that we, and I think it's in large part, like I was talking about with the TA situation, where as teachers and as people who are educating, you feel much more comfortable in the curriculum. You feel much more comfortable not having to show your own vulnerabilities of uncertainty and not knowing, right? Like, what if a kid asks a question you don't know,
Right.
you know, the answer to? Are you gonna? Is that gonna like shift the authority dynamic, or is that gonna shift, like, you know? There's all these silly sort of questions that kind of arise, and I understand there's a place for teacher and students, but it's just it does sort of, unfortunately, so much of their genuine intrinsic motivation and curiosity is stifled by assuming that they won't understand, or that they it's kind of assuming that they won't be able to go that far with a thought, or that far, you know what I mean, like that they won't be able to progress into the deepness of it.
Yeah, and as a teacher, I mean, what are you going to do when you ask for an interpretation on the metamorphosis, and a kid comes up to you and says, well, it's about how we put grandma and grandpa into the nursing homes, and we just kind of treat them like bugs. How do you grade that?
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be very hard to grade. We're just giving a summary of it. It's so
compare.
much easier.
You can
exactly.
compare
There's
it.
like this standard. You can kind of like, does it fit the you know, basically like quite literally, like the teachers would have kind of a stamp out of all the answers. You know what I mean? It's basically like a little, you know, stencil or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? It's like a cookie mold of like, hold it up to the paper, it doesn't match, hold it up to the paper.
Right.
And you can't blame them. They've got like 25 students, you know?
Absolutely.
And like, that's not even just their students. They've got like, you know, what, maybe 8 periods of classes that day or something like
And
that.
how are they supposed to handle 25
Exactly.
individual interpretations that are specific to that very child of the metamorphosis?
Yeah, and that's maybe why I love this motherhood and literature class so much. Sorry to keep on
Sure,
going back to that.
please.
It was my first ever college class too. It was very it's very stands out to me. Yeah, it was like my first ever class. I remember exactly what I was wearing that day, like this green satin top. It was really fun. And there were 7 girls in this class. Well, the boy that was there that day, right? The first day. And I was like, this is the smallest class I've ever been in. This is amazing.
Right.
And so to me that just was like, wow, that changed the entire experience because of that, you know.
Sure.
And I just think like the student to teacher ratio is insane, you know, and you know, for teachers, I don't blame them. Like they've got 25 students per class per period. I mean, there's 8 periods in a day, at least for my school. You know, some schools do it differently with like 4 larger periods a day, but it's like, that's a lot of students. That's a lot of tests. That's a lot of stuff. And so I think you're making a great point that it needs to be something standard that can be quickly measured and quickly graded.
The school system is literally in the penal colony.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's and so I think this is all really, you know, it really touches my heart a lot because I love children, I love you know, education, and so I'm really happy that we're talking about this. Also with the idea of like blue raspberry sugar coating things for kids. It's really funny though, right? Because blue raspberry is a like slushy flavor, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing, right? She isn't that like she's drinking like
slushy.
Yeah, and it's quite literally sugar coating, right? Like it's more sugar on her teeth and like, you know, decay and like
and it's just rotting her teeth.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it's like there's something, I think that was just such a beautiful, so well done that you did that in the story where like there's this sort of double entendre, double meaning there with that.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And then the last thing I'll say is philosophy. Yeah, like it's so funny because philosophy is thought of, I think anytime things get separated into like the ivory tower, like high art or these things where like there's a place for that, don't get me wrong, but it's almost like these things become so obtuse when they are literally in the fabric of reality, right?
Sure.
Art is literally in the fabric of reality. Philosophy is literally in the fabric of reality. And like for me, philosophy has been tremendously helpful in actually coping with the most intimate of my feelings. the most personal and basically just, I don't know how to put it, like your most quotidian things, but also your most like meaningful feelings and experiences, and whatever it is, like just your feelings, your frustrations, your highs, your lows, your desire, your disappointments, all of that. Philosophy, primarily, I would say, like obviously that ties into theology as well. But to me, like all religions are philosophies too. Like I think those things are, but it's like that to me is like where philosophy is incredible, because it's really helped me a lot in terms of just being able to be self-reflective, and given the tools to deconstruct, so that I don't get so fixed on my paranoia or whatever it is that I'm dealing with, my anxiety or whatever. It's like, no, let's deconstruct this. Why do you feel so certain? And like let's negate that in a sense too. And there's so much liberation in that. There's a lot of freedom in that, and there's a lot of beauty, because you learn a lot, and you actually, in opening up the hands to whatever you feel so certain about, and letting go and saying, I actually can't be that certain about that. And why would I want to be anyways? It's tormenting me, right? So open up the hands, learn about it, deconstruct it, start to get self-reflective, and philosophy, I think, is an incredible tool to do that. So anyways, I'm just like, why are we not, and I don't know, like,
absolutely beautiful.
Oh,
I loved that point about philosophy, about how it's in everything, in the fabric of everything.
It is. Sure. It is. It's like air. It's like air. I have this other analogy that like religion is like the earth, philosophy is like air. There's a lot to parse out there because they often overlap, so it's difficult to parse those things. But it's an analogy that I don't know. It's just something that I really feel I'd like to flesh out even more. Sure. But yeah, I think that I don't know, guys. Though it's there's a part of me. It's like, why aren't we teaching this in high school? Why aren't we? But then there's also a part of it's like, would we be like, Rilke is really good about being like, would you even be ready for the question? Would you even be ready? Would you even be ready? And I love that about Rilke, where he's almost like when you could have learned it and it would have been useful, you wouldn't have been able to learn it then. You could only learn it when it's almost too late.
Yes,
and there's something,
absolutely.
And there's and I just think there's something really, in a way, tragic about that, but also sort of like, it's a real kind of, from an education standpoint, it's sort of like a real problem to understand. How could you really kind of give, I don't know, there's a part of me that wants to say you can do it, but you have to be a lot more hands-off and kind of feeding intrinsic motivation for people to come to philosophy on their own terms, without just sort of like force-feeding it on them. Because you can't. It has to be from a genuine seeking. It has to be from a genuine inquiry, I think, and be a genuine risk, I think. So, yeah, what do you guys think?
And if you think back to Goethe and The Sorrows of Young Werther, he writes in such a way that it seems like an everydayness, where Werther is going through these emotions, but he doesn't realize he's going through these emotions. So it kind of speaks to what you're saying about these kids are going through these emotions, absolutely, but they don't know it. They don't know it yet, and they won't know it until they're older and a little wiser, and they're like, wow, that was really dumb that I did back then, or why did I feel like that?
Yeah. Why do you feel like it was the end of the world when really, like, it's going to be okay?
Yes,
I remember that, just really quick, Daniel.
Sure, please.
I remember so distinctly, like, just being, like, being 16, being completely in love with this person, like, in love, whatever that meant at 16 years old. And just, Mary-Lise and I, like, so it was a very funny situation, because Mary-Lise and I, my twin sister and I, both felt the same way about the same person, Yeah. But we were both very, like, loving with each other about it. Like, no, like, you should try to talk to him. And she'd be like, no, you should try and talk to him.
That is so sweet.
It was hilarious. Neither of us ended up talking to him, but, like, except for, like, our youth group, interactions or whatever. But the point of the matter is, like, when he ended up, dating somebody else, I remember both Marilyn and I being, sad, right? It's like, oh no, like this love of our this mutual love of our lives is now like dating someone else. And I remember our mom we were at Subway or something. No, where was it? It was Firehouse. I think it was Subway or Firehouse Subs. It was a sub place. The point of the story is my mom is sitting there with Mary-Lise and I, so kindly, so lovingly, just listening to our little hearts, and she says something like, but there are plenty of fish in the sea. Like, that very, like, quintessential phrase that's used. But when it comes from your mom, who you love and who just is such a patient person, so gracious and graceful, it's like, it really, like, she meant it with all her heart, and she also elaborated on it too. But really was just saying that main point of like there are many fish in the sea. You might feel like he's the only one, but there are others, and you're very young yet, and all of this. But it's funny because at the time you're kind of like it's a mild consolation, right? Because
you don't understand what I'm going through, Mom.
Right.
This was the love of my life.
and it's so funny. But I think like philosophy would come in there and sort of allow you to understand like what is love, right? What is
Absolutely.
love? What is it? Merely a feeling, right? Are you loving your idea of the person, right? Is this and all of those beautiful things that help you actually really actually beautifully temper your emotions. You may still feel those hard things.
Sure.
That's just human that
But
you'll
there's a
feel that.
tempering.
But there's a tempering. There's something that allows you to kind of sort of like it's tempering is the best word that comes to mind. That tempers those feelings and allows you to better handle and work through them. You have something to do with those feelings. You can actually use them as material to work through thoughts and work through like, so if that, what is that? To kind of progress your own thinking or like challenge your own thinking on that. Because I think a lot of like very, very strong feelings that we feel completely stuck in, we often get that way when we don't believe that they can be questioned, right? When we don't believe that there's any other reality beyond them, right? And philosophy helps you realize, tap, 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 you might need to negate that. Like you might want to, you might want to
use
question
that in my everyday.
Oh, please.
Tap, tap, you need to negate it.
Oh my gosh, please do. We'll just start doing that.
That's
People
really
are like,
funny.
what the heck? But we'll,
Funny.
Somebody's having a big emotion. Tap, tap, tap.
you need to negate that.
That's really fun. Well,
But the tap, tap, tap's important. That's yeah.
we talked with Mr. Barnes on how a problem of philosophy is the infinite ability for it to ask another question. But we also noted in that conversation how the fact that philosophy can always question itself is actually a virtue, because that means it can look at itself and stop itself, right? It can use infinite questioning to eat everything, sure, but it can also stop itself. Well, likewise, the variability of philosophy to always be able to question anything means it could be a potential resource against your feelings, and it could question them. And the funny thing is, we're often like, no, my feelings are unquestionable, to give them authority. But that's precisely why they're kind of totalitarian on you. They feel totalitarian because they feel unquestionable. But philosophy, if you realize that everything can be questioned, if everything can be a topic of philosophy, then you can never ever say that anything is unquestionable. If Samuel Barnes is right, which he is, that anything could be a topic of philosophy, then there's no such thing as an unquestionable thing. And in one way that's terrifying, but in another way it's liberating.
It is. It is.
Because it means nothing has to have total control over you. And that would be a powerful thing to give children who indeed have their hormones and feelings and whatever, who constantly feel like they are controlled by something that cannot be questioned. Philosophy would let them know that everything can be questioned, and therefore they always have some say. They always have some power. Another point is you were mentioning teaching and so on and so forth. Basically, in order to do what is being described in regard to really incubating philosophical ability, you don't so much need teachers as you need hosters. And the system today is all about teachers, when really you need individuals who are good at hosting a discussion. Hosting skills are not the same as teaching skills. They can overlay, yes, but the ability to host a discussion is more Socratic, more like you see in Socrates go, well, what do you mean by that? And being able to go, well, John over there said, you would need an individual in a classroom to be able to host a discussion with the students, to guide it, to direct it, to connect it with other students, and host. Teachers are needed for the sciences, like to teach you like facts. When you're dealing with facts, you need teachers. When you're dealing with ideas, you need hosters. And we blur those together. And arguably, though, as computers replace humans in the areas of analytical thought, the need for teachers will be much less. There simply will be very soon a world where there is no reason to learn calculus, like zero. You can say there is, and you can come up with something. Well, it activates neurons in your brain that other. Blah, blah, blah. I really despise that argument because it's unfalsifiable and it sounds like a myth. It sounds like something you tell yourself to be okay with things. And I would be okay. I guess I'd be okay with it if you weren't simultaneously sacrificing like everything else for it. Like you're sacrificing philosophy and hosting discussions so that you learn math that a computer will do for you because it activates some neuron. Okay, that's nice. The neuron activates and then turns off. I don't know what you're telling me. But anyway, so you need teachers in the realms of science and math and facts. But as we move forward and technology becomes stronger, the need for teachers will be less and less because you'll simply be able to look up stuff. And we can tell ourselves, but it's good to learn this. And it's like, yes, you can always come up with some, but no, you won't. Because you see, here's the thing. If you're learning X, you're not learning Y. And if you're activating the neuron in your brain to do math, you're not learning the ability to host a philosophical discussion. Is that a good trade-off or not? You would have to convince me that this magical neuron you activate when you learn math is more important than philosophical reasoning. I have not seen this evidence. No, I am not saying that people who know math are not smart, and I'm not saying that you cannot have genius that comes out of mathematics. But let's put it this way. The way you teach mathematics at a very high level is not like you see in high school at all. It is much more theoretical. It is much more... You don't take tests. You sit down with mathematical paradoxes and work on them for months and years and figure them. There's not a time limit. There's not a memorize this. If you forget something, you look it up in the book. It becomes a puzzle to solve. Math at the high level is like solving a puzzle, and you are not denied resources. You are not allowed what school calls cheating, the world calls collaboration. So you created these really arbitrary structures in classrooms, and if you follow those arbitrary structures and you do well at math, we say you're good at math. No, you might be awful at math because when you're given a high-level mathematical problem, you literally don't know how to collaborate because that was called cheating. You don't know how to think about a problem for a super long time because you switch the topic every week to a new area. You've never encountered a math problem that no one knows the answer to, and you have not been introduced to the entire toolbox of mathematical tools that you would need to solve it. So I am not convinced at all that the way that math is taught at high school has anything to do with high-level mathematics. If indeed you're saying, well, we want to teach kids to do high-level mathematics, be my guest. I think that would be a wonderful thing, but the way you teach math is radically different, and the same goes with science. The way they teach science has nothing to do with high-level science, in my opinion. Yeah, I'm not convinced that the way you learn science in, say, high school has anything to do with high-level science. High-level science is like solving a mystery, solving a puzzle. There's no arbitrary time limit, etc., so forth. So, in a way, there's a kind of sense in which the structure of school is like the lies being told to Poppy. You know, where Poppy's told lies. Like, there's a kind of sugarcoating of what science really is. It's like, there's a kind of sugarcoating. It's like, well, if you're good at taking a test, you're good at science. And it's like, if you're good at taking a test, you're good at math. It feels like sugarcoating to me. Where, in fact, if you open the floodgates and you let kids collaborate, you gave them problems nobody knows the answer to, and you said, yeah, we don't know, go. That would be the truth. This is mathematics.
Technology, like they could look stuff up.
They could look stuff up. They could do. This is the truth. This is what it actually is. Oh, you're smart, and yet you can't solve this? Man, the truth is you can be smart and not figure stuff out. Ain't that crazy? Like, being smart doesn't necessarily mean you succeed. Crazy, right? But in school, if you're smart, you succeed. One of the greatest truths of all, is learning that being smart doesn't mean you succeed. And school creates an environment where you come to believe that if you're smart, you succeed. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible lie. Mm-hmm. One of the greatest things you can learn is that you can be smart and fail, and therefore you do more than just be smart. Mm-hmm. You learn to focus on other things, like relationships, like people, like grit, like work, like endurance.
Like creativity.
Like creativity.
Yeah.
It is a terrible thing if you teach people that they'll succeed if they're smart, because then why be creative? And if they're not creative, and someone like Dietrich McCloskey is correct, that basically the modern world is a result of creativity. If there's no creativity, there's no technology, there's no air conditioning, there's no coffee, there's nothing. There's nothing. There were smart people since the beginning of time. What made the difference is creativity. So if you teach people indirectly that being smart means you succeed, then you remove the incentive to generate the abilities that have made human civilization. and that have made advancement, and that have made history not be a story of just crawling through the mud. So school ends up being, for me, one of the great sugar coatings, to allude back to the blue raspberry. To me, one of the great sugar coatings, and maybe the ultimate sugar coating, is the idea that being smart means you succeed. It's not true. And the sooner that you know this, the sooner you can prepare accordingly. And yet people don't leave school until like 25. And then they're 25. And their entire life they've been told that if they're smart, they'll succeed. And they are not prepared for the world where they find out that's not true. And they're fragile. And so there's mental illness. So there's all sorts of problems where people aren't happy. Where had they been told that being smart does not mean you will succeed, they may have prepared accordingly. But they are not prepared accordingly. And so they respond poorly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was beautiful.
It's like I feel like I want to like snap.
Like, no.
Or like with like bongos. I love it. That
Well,
was
the other
beautiful,
thing is intelligence. I mean, I would just add, is intelligence won't get you out of Kafka.
Mm-hmm.
Intelligence is why you're in Kafka. You're a lawyer. You're a lawyer. I mean, you're smart. You know where to go. You go to the court. You go to the judge. Who do you go to next, Joseph? You find a lawyer. You find someone to represent you. He's smart. He knows where to go, and his problem gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they know where the castle is, so they follow that way. They know who to talk to, so they talk. Well, it gets worse. Intelligence makes things worse in Kafka. Doesn't make them better. You need relationship. You need I thou. You need other things in Kafka. They're not there. And the characters, even if they know they need those things, don't have the ability to get them. Or the willingness or the emotional resources to enter into those things. So, indeed, I would posit and suggest that it would be far better to have hosters of discussions in which people could figure out that smartness doesn't guarantee success. You're not nearly as smart as you thought. That's one of the great things Socrates does. And in fact, the intelligence that is useful is the ability is a creative intelligence. I would say philosophical intelligence is very creative. Your ability to think on the fly, to improvise, to create an environment, to create your ideas, to create your own values. And in philosophical reasoning, you see a coming together of intelligence with creativity, analytical with continental, I would say. If you do not have environments that host discussions where that can occur, then you will have environments of which, in their very medium, indirectly tell you that being smart means you succeed. And as a result, you'll be unprepared for reality. And then when reality hits, you will not be prepared for it. So thinking of a need for hosters, not just teachers, and thinking of a transformation of the structure to not indirectly teach people that success, that intelligence equals success, I think would go a long way to, well, helping us also not tell lies to children, because we'll stop telling lies to ourselves. And the less lies we tell to ourselves, the less lies it will be to trickle down into children.
That was good. That was good, Daniel.
Who knows what time in the morning it is now.
No, that was the best discussion ever.
You're very sweet.
That was
It
wonderful.
was very sweet.
It was
Well, for
really
more
wonderful.
by Greener Side of Sam, please visit
Yes.
greenersideofsam.com. Her videos on Kafka are unrivaled and have been extremely valuable to us, as has been our friendship. So we are
thank
thrilled
you
to have her here this
guys.
evening.
You
And
guys
thank
are
you.
wonderful.
Thank you for
and
coming.
It's awesome to actually see you in person.
It is amazing. It is amazing.
It's
So
wonderful.
we're
It's truly
very,
wonderful for
very,
us too.
very thrilled to have you. So thank you so
Yes.
much, Sam. It's
Yes.
been a thrill.
Thank you so much.